When a city orders 400,000 evacuation beds, is it truly saving lives or simply saving face? Across Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, officials are quietly rehearsing the largest civilian evacuations since the end of the Cold War. The plans are breathtaking in their detail. Entire populations could be moved within mere days, with buses idling, school gyms and churches awaiting families, and escape routes charted down to the last kilometer. The atmosphere is taut, a blend of practiced calm and rising anxiety. Authorities warn that a Russian invasion could begin in as few as 3 days. Citizens are urged to pack emergency bags, memorize exits, and stay alert. In some districts, evacuation drills blur the line between preparation and performance, turning abstract dangers into real-life routines. In Lithuania alone, up to 400,000 people, almost 1 in every 7 residents, could be relocated, with Kaunas prepared as a vast shelter. Estonia's plans cover nearly 10% of its population. Latvian officials say even more might scramble at the first hint of crisis. But is this warning grounded in reality, or is it theater? The choreography is precise, the messaging relentless. With each new alert, the question grows sharper. Do leaders know something they are not sharing, or are they simply eager to appear strong and decisive? There are real risks to this spectacle. Overstating threats could waste resources, spread panic, and erode public trust. Yet inaction is unthinkable, haunted as the region is by the shadow of its past. So is all this caution, or calculated drama? Why is this happening now, with such urgency, and on such a scale? The line between vigilance and performance has never felt thinner. But the Baltic states are not alone. From Berlin to Kyiv, a new wave of civil defense campaigns is sweeping Europe, each shaped as much by politics as by security. Imagine the historic city of Vilnius, Lithuania, where centuries-old streets wind beneath the gaze of ancient castles. Today, these cobbled streets see not just tourists, but citizens carrying backpacks filled with canned food, water purification tablets, and copies of vital documents. These are not survivalists. They are ordinary people, following government advice in a world where being prepared is no longer just a slogan, but a civic duty. Picture a world where a go bag waits by your front door, not out of panic, but because your government tells you it is necessary. In the Baltic states, this is not a paranoid fantasy. It is daily life, shaped by geography and a history of living in the shadow of Russia. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all share borders with their powerful neighbor, and their fears of another invasion are as old as their hard-won independence. Since war erupted further east, those anxieties have only sharpened. Here, officials do not keep warnings quiet. They announce them loudly. One Lithuanian leader even claimed their country could fall to Russia in as little as 3 days. The message is blunt. Complacency is dangerous. Everyone must be ready for the worst. But these warnings are not just statistics. Lithuania is preparing to evacuate as many as 400,000 people, nearly 1 in every 7 citizens. Estonia's goal: move up to 1/10 of its population if needed. City planners are drafting evacuation routes, turning churches and gyms into mass shelters, and packing supply kits so that hundreds of thousands can move fast if the order comes. It is not only about the logistics. Leaders know fear can fray communities. Posters across cities read, "You are not alone. You will have a neighbor in a sleeping bag." The aim is to turn evacuation into a shared responsibility, a civic act, not a signal to panic. Yet preparing for disaster is costly. Every hour spent rehearsing catastrophe is time not spent fixing roads, building hospitals, or improving schools. Daily life is shaped by the looming threat, not the promise of progress. So are these drills simply wise planning? Or is something deeper going on? A strategy where the ever-present threat itself becomes a tool, shaping how people think, spend, and trust. To understand the gravity of these preparations, let's look back at history. During the height of the Cold War, Western cities like London and New York conducted air raid drills, with schoolchildren hiding under desks and families mapping out bomb shelters in their basements. The constant specter of nuclear war shaped not only infrastructure, but the psyche of entire generations. In the Soviet Union, civil defense was a daily reality. Every citizen was expected to know the nearest shelter, to practice donning gas masks, and to stockpile essentials. Today, the Baltic states echo that old tension, but with new urgency. But the Baltic states are only the beginning. Across Europe, similar spectacles of readiness are unfolding, for reasons that go far beyond security. Take Germany, for example. In the city of Hamburg, authorities recently distributed pamphlets instructing residents on how to respond to chemical attacks, power outages, and cyber threats. In Berlin, schools have been required to participate in evacuation drills, with students shepherded into underground shelters built during the Cold War. In Poland, local governments have held citywide blackout rehearsals, simulating the aftermath of sabotage or military attack. These are not isolated events. They reflect a continent-wide shift toward preparedness, often accompanied by dramatic headlines and urgent government statements. What if the real crisis is not tanks at the border, but politicians' hunger for an enemy? When a government warns of danger, it does more than inform. It unites the public, quells dissent, and pins national anxieties on a convenient scapegoat. Economic trouble or rising unrest are swept aside by a new, urgent story. The nation must band together because peril is closing in. This strategy has consequences that ripple through daily life. Instead of repairing roads or building hospitals, budgets shift to bunkers, military drills, and stockpiles of emergency food. Civil defense funds balloon, while teachers and doctors are told resources must wait. The spectacle, hundreds of thousands rehearsing evacuations, stadiums and churches turned into shelters, makes the emergency feel real, even if no shot has been fired. Real-world examples abound. In Latvia, city governments have converted university dormitories into potential mass shelters, complete with cots, canned food, and first aid stations. During a recent exercise, volunteers played the roles of evacuees, emergency workers, and even journalists, practicing how information would be managed in a real crisis. The scale of these rehearsals is staggering. One drill in Riga involved more than 30,000 participants, supported by hundreds of buses and dozens of medical teams. All of this is designed to create the impression of seamless readiness, but also to reinforce the narrative of ever-present threat. Consider the Baltic states. Officials there plan evacuations on a scale that rivals natural disasters, with entire cities rehearsing their escape. Lithuania aims to relocate up to 400,000 people, nearly 1 in 7 citizens. Estonia prepares to move as much as 10% of its population, and Latvia's plans envision a third of all residents on the road before any siren sounds. For leaders, it is less about tanks and more about projecting readiness and control. Contrast that with Ukraine. There, officials often tell people to rely on themselves. Even as infrastructure collapses, citizens are urged to prepare for heating delays and to stockpile wood stoves, not just for invasion, but because the system is already fraying. The message is simple. Survival, not just defense, is at stake. Meanwhile, in Germany, intelligence agencies warn of looming attack, fueling public anxiety. Each warning becomes a reason to expand surveillance, grant new powers, and boost security budgets. With every drill or urgent briefing, the sense of siege grows, a society always on guard, always expecting the worst, and primed to surrender more authority to those in charge. This cycle of alarm is risky. When leaders keep amplifying threats, public trust can erode. Soon, people wonder whose interests these warnings serve. Misplaced spending leaves schools and hospitals behind, while a constant drumbeat of danger opens the door to government overreach or panic-driven mistakes. What if governments keep sounding the alarm year after year? Where does this path lead? A society always bracing for catastrophe, and what does it cost in freedom, resources, and trust? To see how this can unfold, look at the example of the United States during the era of McCarthyism. Fear of communist infiltration led to blacklists, loyalty oaths, and the suspension of civil liberties, all justified in the name of national security. The Red Scare left scars that took decades to heal. Today, Europe faces its own version of the perpetual emergency, with governments urging vigilance but sometimes blurring the line between prudent caution and political theater. But the deeper question is, do these warnings actually make anyone safer, or do they just reshape society in subtler, more lasting ways? The answer may reveal more about power than about protection. A society hooked on warnings starts to see enemies in every shadow. When risk becomes the constant background hum, panic ceases to be a rare outburst and turns into a kind of collective instinct. Living in permanent emergency mode hands governments an endless excuse to expand defense budgets, grow intelligence agencies, and restrict freedoms, all under the banner of safety. The line between vigilance and paranoia blurs until extraordinary measures quietly become routine. Consider the United Kingdom after the July 7th bombings. The government introduced sweeping new surveillance laws, expanded police powers, and increased funding for counterterrorism. While some measures were justified, others drew criticism for infringing on privacy and civil liberties. Over time, extraordinary steps became ordinary, normalized by the constant refrain of, "We must stay prepared." Slowly, the public becomes numb to actual danger signals. Worse, people may even support preemptive actions just to regain a sense of control. If every headline screams crisis, the ability to separate true threats from staged drama vanishes. This shift is visible. In Germany, for instance, national debates have moved beyond basic defense. Officials now discuss active countermeasures, not just preventing attacks, but justifying operations abroad. The language of protection slides into talk of justified offense. Each new policy is sold as controlled risk, but history warns that such risks can spiral. As fear saturates daily life, through endless drills, relentless news alerts, and urgent government statements, it becomes nearly impossible to hold a calm, rational debate. Anxiety loops back on itself. Warnings fuel vigilance. Vigilance demands action. Action sparks more warnings. Soon, proportion is lost. This mindset extracts a price beyond money. The true cost may be peace itself, as nerves snap and escalation risks rise. Over time, democratic checks crumble, and people accept exceptional measures as standard, surrendering liberties for a security that always remains just out of reach. But what happens when the spectacle of readiness takes on a life of its own? In places like Estonia and Ukraine, the rituals of preparation become part of everyday identity. Surviving a harsh winter, or a new conflict, relies less on stockpiling gear and more on sharpening your critical instincts. In a climate where every month brings fresh warnings of disaster, skepticism becomes your first shield. Pause before you panic. Ask, does this threat come from credible evidence, or is it theater designed to sway public mood? Let's consider how ordinary people can respond. In Finland, a country with a long tradition of civil preparedness, the government teaches citizens to distinguish official alerts from rumors. Community workshops train residents in first aid, fire safety, and critical thinking. The message is clear. Real security depends on an informed, resilient public, not just on government action. Interrogate the sources. Who is sharing the alarm, and what do they stand to gain? In an era of dramatic headlines, separating facts from performances is the difference between staying informed and being swept along by fear. Look past the blaring language. Where do emergency funds actually go? Are new safety measures truly proportional to the risk, or are they symbolic gestures meant to reassure or distract? Demand clarity. Challenge officials to explain not just what they are doing, but why and how they define success. Push for real solutions. Are leaders tackling energy shortages, economic divides, and vulnerable infrastructure, or are they merely rehearsing for catastrophe? Dramatic drills and stern speeches may look like action, but rarely fix root problems. Insist on deeper answers, not just surface-level performances. Community bonds are a quiet force against panic. Build strong ties with neighbors, support open channels of information, and fight for infrastructure that endures any crisis. When people unite, share, and communicate, the power of fear weakens. Never forget, fear is a tool. It can rally people against true danger, or it can distract, divide, and control. Awareness, simple, persistent awareness, is your first act of resistance. If you blindly accept every official warning, you risk more than a sleepless night or a pointless drill. You risk losing your freedom to question, to choose, and to hold power to account. That is the real danger lurking beneath the surface. So, when the next urgent headline flashes across your screen, what should you do? The answer may not be what you expect. The urge to prepare is natural, but sometimes the bravest act is to ask uncomfortable questions. In the next chapter, we explore how citizens are quietly rewriting the rules of resilience. In a world always rehearsing for the next disaster, your sharpest defense is clarity, not panic. Right now, leaders across the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Germany are staging massive drills, mapping evacuation routes, and building layers of civil defense. These moves look like vision and responsibility. Yet, beneath the surface, they serve other aims, shaping public perception, distracting from local troubles, and justifying ever-expanding budgets. We hear officials unveiling evacuation plans for tens of thousands, churches becoming makeshift shelters, and warnings of threats arriving within days. But behind the curtain, this spectacle of preparedness often fuels anxiety more than it offers safety. The cycle of alarm keeps citizens uneasy and gives politicians leverage to steer the narrative and tighten their hold. Why should this matter to you? Because every surge of fear does more than dominate the news. It decides where your tax money goes, whether to hospitals and roads or to bunkers and emergency stockpiles. It shifts laws and policies, sometimes quietly eroding the freedoms you may take for granted. In a society addicted to crisis theater, civil liberties shrink, priorities warp, and the abnormal becomes routine. You might ask, what practical steps can you take to resist this drift toward constant crisis? First, cultivate a habit of skepticism. When you hear warnings, look for corroborating evidence from independent sources. Second, participate in community forums or local government meetings where you can question officials directly. Third, support organizations and media outlets that prioritize investigative reporting over sensationalism. Fourth, foster resilience in your own neighborhood. Organize information-sharing groups, support local preparedness initiatives, and advocate for balanced budgets that prioritize both safety and the well-being of ordinary citizens. Remember, a community that communicates and collaborates is far less vulnerable to panic or manipulation. But above all, keep perspective. History is filled with examples of societies that lost their way in the fog of fear, but also of those that found strength in clarity and solidarity. During the Blitz in London, for example, citizens faced real bombs, but what sustained them was not endless drills or government warnings, but mutual aid, humor, and a refusal to let fear define their lives. You are not just an audience member in this performance. Your peace of mind, your power as a citizen, and the future course of your society rely on your vigilance. Challenge alarmist stories. Seek facts instead of fear. Insist on transparency when leaders invoke hidden threats to justify sweeping changes. It is tempting to be swept up in the spectacle of emergencies and dire headlines. But real resilience begins with understanding, not surrendering to panic. By staying alert, asking difficult questions, and refusing to let fear set your worldview, you help guide your community towards sanity and true security. The aim is never to ignore real dangers, but to resist manipulation and keep your perspective clear. The more you see beyond the spectacle, the more influence you have on what your society will become next.